Okay, everybody, welcome back to the How to Podcast series, where I bring great podcasters on, interesting people from the podcast community, and we get to chat podcasting. Chris is here today. He's got 2 shows that he's involved in, and if you go to his website, we'll have a link to that for you. You can go check it out. This gentleman, I don't know how he does everything all at the same time. Like, he just, everything, if you think of anything, he's probably done it, and it's on his website. I was listening to his music on Spotify. I'm checking out his images and photos he takes. There's so much. There's so much for this gentleman, and I'm excited to have him on the podcast. And 2 new shows for you to listen to as well. Chris, welcome to the How to Podcast series. Hey,
David, it's really great to be here, and I love what you're doing, kind of in the depth of you were just telling me earlier that you've got like your 9th podcast, and I appreciate the compliments. Like, I sometimes struggle with keeping 2 up and running at the same time. So that's really a testament to ingenuity and productivity there, I would say.
Yeah, or a guy that needs another hobby, probably, maybe.
It's interesting. Like, my 2 podcasts are both professional commercial, right? They're not intended to be advertising led, but they get produced in vastly different ways. One is an outgrowth of work that I was doing when I was still at Microsoft. It's one of the Microsoft official podcasts, the Intrazone. That's a place where we have Mark Cashman, who originally created the show. More on him later. Has put a lot of attention and resources into how does it get produced, how does it get advertised, how does it get marketed, and so it's pretty successful. We tend to get 5,000 to 10,000 listens a week on the Intrazone.
Wow.
That also helps. It's no small help that you've got Microsoft in front of it. However, the Polaris podcast that I'm doing with Synerger, that again, it's commercial, but it is not supposed to be a full-time job. So I have to be as efficient as possible. And how do I solicit the right people, develop the right content, get it out there? I'm fascinated with, from your perspective, like, how can you do how can you have 9 podcasts running at the same time?
Well, honestly, I'm going to flip it back at you. How do you end up doing an official Microsoft podcast? Like, that's not something that you'll see on a job board somewhere. Like, how do you land in that seat?
So about 7 years ago, my friend Mark Cashman, who's also employed at Microsoft, he's still there. He came to me and said he wanted to start a podcast. Would I sponsor that? And the world is full of first annual events that never go anywhere. And so I said, sure. And I figured that Mark would go get budget to get some sort of digital recorder, and would record a couple of episodes, and then it would probably fall by the wayside, which is fine. Experimentation is good. But he really, dug in deep with Microsoft Studios. And if you've ever been to the Microsoft campus, there is kind of a full-bore video and audio production facility. And for the first couple of years, pre-pandemic, we only recorded by going into studio, where we'd have live engineers, live recording people, a producer with us, and headphones, the right sound mixing area. But he really made a go of it and focused on, where specifically he wanted to cover, which began with just the SharePoint technology, but really has moved to all of the Microsoft collaboration and productivity tools, what's called Microsoft 365. And so there's a huge fan base for that stuff. And so you can also kind of dig into a lot of different aspects, whether you're looking at AI or remote work, or, Microsoft keeps coming up with new product areas. And so having that focus, is really carried it along. And his engineering partner also knows how to place the right ads, which hasn't hurt.
Like for me, I remember I've been using Microsoft forever, and I remember working in corporate and leveraging SharePoint and being able to do things with SharePoint that make people go, wait, show me that again. Like, what did you do? And I'm like, well, just do this, this, and this. And they're like, okay, well, we've never seen that before. Like something like bulk uploads to SharePoint from, and I'm like, well, it just makes sense. And I would go sit with my IT team and show them this. And they're like, we need to document this. I'm like, I thought this was like common knowledge. So having a podcast is interesting because now I can go and because I'm a user, I can go and hear what's happening and I can listen to, what's being done in Microsoft and be in the loop. And I think your audience, your audience and your audience knows you. That's a great connection. I like that.
It's fun. It's led to, you and I were chatting about this. So we've sometimes recorded live, like with an audience. Like we'll go to a conference, and I'll have 4 or 5 panelists on stage. We'll have like 100 people in the room, and that's something that's like it's a privilege to be able to do that because a lot of this, whether you're doing a podcast or a webinar, David, if when I say something that I think is clever or funny, seldom do you get that immediate feedback that says, well, you're not that clever and certainly not that funny. But it's great to be able to do that. If for the folks who are listening to us who may not realize this, SharePoint in particular has always had a passionate grassroots following. It really kind of went viral starting around 2009. And there were so many different user groups and, these free events called SharePoint Saturdays that popped up that had, at one point there were like 200 of them a year around the world. And that really passionate fan base, which may sound strange if you haven't been part of it. There's a role for so many people and so many people who are just trying to learn more. And so that technology, I think, lends itself to that kind of stuff that we're doing. That the very personal connection that you're trying to drive in podcasts is just, I don't know. It's the audience for, say, Excel is very different.
Yeah. A lot of sorting of columns and macros. Hey, let's talk macros. I love macros. It's amazing.
But I want to be fair to those Excel fans that you have in the audience here. We had a guest on last year, Stephen Rose, who talked about something called the Excel World Championships.
What?
Which he was a judge for them. They were held last November in Las Vegas. It was broadcast on ESPN 8, the Ocho. And it's individuals or teams who are doing like live, all of the super complicated stuff that looks like scientific calculations and like, build a matrix to do this and solve this, where you have to sort of do it live on stage, like in time trials against another team. So there are people who get crazy about Excel too. And I wouldn't have known that if it weren't for a podcast. So
see, pivot tables unite, everyone. Come on. I love it. So for you as a podcaster, then what keeps you podcasting? Why do you keep moving forward with your shows? And is it you're given kind of some direction, or do you get to decide where you want to go with the podcast? How does that work?
I get to decide where we want to go. Right. So deciding, and it's sort of in concert with, the folks, on one side, there's folks within my firm who have particular areas of expertise and particular passions. That are going to make them better guests. And then as I'm developing folks who are kind of from outside that retinue, or within the Microsoft podcast, it gives me an opportunity to open doors and ask questions. That's one of the things, I get to meet more people. I get to learn more. And it's that discovery process is one of the things that drives me. Like, what keeps you focused and moving forward on your podcasts?
A lot of it for me is connection. The people that I get to talk with. Yesterday I had a guest on my show from Nigeria. And there's the idea that a guy in Canada can have a conversation with another podcaster in Nigeria, have something in common with someone I've never met in a totally different part of the world. The idea that I can travel the world with a microphone, it's just amazing. And also to have time in people's calendars where if I ever reached out to them without a podcast, they probably wouldn't even take my call or read my email. But the fact that you throw a podcast in the mix, it does open the door to have some pretty interesting conversations.
I found there's two other things, right? So one is I get to meet and learn the personal side.
Yeah.
Secondly, and this is, I'll be candid. There's the personal side for other people is I do believe everyone has a voice and something to contribute, and people can be afraid of like, well, I don't want to write something. I'm not a good writer, and I don't want to go on a stage because I get stage fright. And you can break down a lot of barriers for many people by just saying, it's going to be a conversation. We're just going to talk. Yeah. We're going to record it, and we get to edit it. So if we say something wrong, we get to fix it.
Yeah.
In a way that, like, I remember I was filming a customer case study years ago in the UK. And the way you do these things is that they're interview style, but typically the person who said, we built a new mobile app so that the folks on the sales teams on retail floors could look up upcoming price changes, whatever it was. You talk to them, they sound great, they're engaged and so forth. You put a camera on in the room on them, and they stare at it and they freeze to it. And this one gentleman was like, you start with like, hey, could you tell us who you are and what you do? And it's like, yeah, and he froze on his name.
Oh no.
We wound up splicing, I think, 2-word snippets together for that. Podcasts just make it easier for people to find their voice. It's one of the things I like bringing, not just to the audience, but bringing to that person, is that they can have the confidence to start doing those things. And I've also found that if on the commercial side, if there's a relationship that we're trying to build with another company, a podcast is a great place to start. Because, saying let's go on a 6-city tour and like go see customers together, that's complicated. But if you sit down with someone and say, hey, let's have a prep call, let's have a call, and then look at it and see how it goes, you kind of feel for like, do we fit? Is there a mesh? And if you do, what you develop in a podcast, thanks to the magic of things like ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini, you can like start to carve that up and say, how could we reuse what we said on this podcast? Like, could I turn it into like a 1-pager on a topic or build a presentation out of it? You can put it in a lot of different directions. And I also found that it makes me a better public speaker. Like, I don't know if you've observed that, David, but like I, for years, have done a lot of conference presentations on stages around the world, and I'm pretty good extemporaneously, and a couple of bullet points in memory, and I can just get going. I think there are some tropes in podcasting where, especially in the intros and outros, I found that if it's just me, there is no excuse for me to begin a podcast with like, hi, today you're listening to this, that. It makes me be a little bit more thoughtful about how do I say things. And it makes me a better speaker in most other regards.
And a better listener as well.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
What I love about this too is you're not potentially standing in front of a totally cold audience as well.
Right.
The potential of a listener sitting in one of those chairs at a live event to come and hear you is pretty high. So the room isn't cold. The room is warm. So where if you didn't have a podcast and you're up there on stage, the potential of somebody having heard you on stage somewhere else, probably not as likely as if you have a podcast with a bunch of episodes and people can listen to you anywhere around the world. The shareability of it, right? There's a lot of advantages to having a podcast then.
Right. I mean, look, some people are readers, some people are watchers, and some are listeners. And you're going to tap into a whole different, like, I think, psychological experiential segment of the audience, because there's people who do really well processing audio information, whether they focus on or in the background. It's an intimate relationship. It's a privilege to get your voice kind of coming into the center of someone's head. But it is rewarding when you run into someone somewhere who will tell you, "Hey, I heard something you said, and I tried it, and it worked." Sometimes people write back to you, but it's great when you kind of see that out in the live world. And what's it been like for you, like, meeting a listener in real time?
I try to put things into my process that allows for communication.
Mm-hmm.
I think that as new podcasters, a lot of people get frustrated at the lack of response.
Right.
And only a small percentage of your audience will ever respond, which is not the most encouraging stat. But making it easy for people to connect with you, I think, is one of the key things. So for me, I use like SpeakPipe so people can leave me voice messages. That's one option. There's a bunch of different things you can do. But I did, I spoke at a girls' school here in Canada virtually. And it was 22 girls, grade 6 class. And one of the girls shouted out in the class, "My dad listens to you in the car on the way to work." And they're like, "Can you say hi to my dad?" or something. I'm like, what? Like, yeah. Okay, well, that's really weird. Like, you kind of, in that moment, you realize there's actually people on the other end of this microphone listening to this, right? A gentleman reached out to me from Poland, listened to 100 episodes and said, "I want to give you something." And I thought he meant advice. But he's like, "No, I want to buy you a camera." I'm like, "You want to buy me a camera?" He's like, "Yeah, for your podcast. I just want to say thank you." Here's a gentleman I probably will never meet in person in Warsaw, Poland, that identified with the show, connected with the content, and wanted to show his appreciation. Like, how, really? Like, little things like that come up for me. I had a gentleman this week, he listened to the show, one of my other podcasts, and I have a buy me coffee link on my website. So people can, give money to the show to say thanks. He bought me 100 coffees, like $100 worth of coffee. I'm like, it just came in today. He's like, "Thanks for the show. It was great." I'm like, wow. Like, as an engagement piece, wow. I love when people engage with your content.
Tim
and
Horton
anything
Tim Horton may also have a fan there.
Right? Anything you can do to encourage engagement. Right. Having somebody leave you a voice message with something like SpeakPipe, for example, allows me to bring that voice into my show. Mm-hmm. And for a non-podcaster to leave a message for a podcast they admire and then hear their voice on that same show in a later episode, they're going to share that. They don't understand how podcasts work. But right. I left Chris a message. Chris played my voice message on his podcast and acknowledged me as a listener. What? Like, I don't know how podcasts work, but I heard my voice on a show that I admire. I'm telling everybody. Right. So,
yeah, that's interesting. We're building out something for, there's a fairly sizable Microsoft conference coming up in about a month and a half called the M365 conference. And it's been through various permutations over the years with SharePoint conference. We're just starting to do some work to capture people's histories of the event. Like, what was it like to have Bill Clinton as the speaker? Or why did someone bring a coffin to the conference once? All of that storytelling, we're doing some work to try to capture it, to get it in audio format so we can present a little bit more of an oral history of this event and take some of the best stories we hear and kind of bring them live on the air. But yeah, I think that, being able to bring listeners' voices into the podcast, that's great. It's great the way that you're doing that.
Then it starts building upon itself too. Because then when I hear someone else's voice on the show, and then I keep hearing the host say, "Leave me a message, I'll throw you into the podcast." You're like, yeah, whatever. He'll never do it. And then once you hear him do it, or her do it on their show, you're like, wait a minute, they actually are telling the truth. Mm-hmm. And then again, if you take that big, huge step to go from a passive listener to an active contributor to a podcast, I think that's amazing. I encourage all new podcasters to kind of have a 3-pronged approach to building their community, to get their podcast listeners to self-identify. There's a gentleman named Kevin Palmieri has a podcast. He talks about this, but get them to put their hand up and say, "I listened to Chris's show." That's the first step. And a lot of podcasters would stop at that and go, "Thanks." So you get a message on, Instagram, whatever, you see your stats, you can see that there's somebody listening. Great. The second one is when you can have a conversation with the host, either through social media, email, SpeakPipe, whatever. But you actually now have a back and forth with a host that you admire, and now you're having conversations. That's a totally different level. And then the third one is when you can have the community talk to each other, where you, as a creator, create a community of listeners who talk about you and you're not even in the room. But they're like, I listened to episode 3. I listened to episode 3. What did you like? I like this. And now you're being talked about and built up from your community ground up. So those are my 3 main focuses for my show that I try to build.
Yeah, I remember Mark was just so happy when someone came to a conference and said, hey, I have an Intrazone hat. I'd love it. Could you sign it for me?
Come on.
Yeah, it's like, is this really happening?
Is this a real thing?
But it is, because people, if someone's been listening to you, putting that investment of time in, you've already started building a relationship, even if it's invisible to you. So I think, spot on the ways that you carry that forward and get their voice and their engagement and their dialogue. I also think it makes a better show. When you have that feedback loop coming in, you sort of notice what were they paying attention to, and that seemed to work, and sort of reinforces that those messages and those topics are ones that are probably worth spending more time on.
Yeah, and I know from my perspective, my listeners don't care much about my stats.
Yep.
They care about my community. And the idea that as I'm listening to your show, Chris, that I'm part of something bigger than just you and me listening, you talking. But then now I hear another voice from someone like me who also enjoys something that I enjoy. It's like your favorite hobby. If you like collecting sports cards and you go to a sports card convention, you're surrounded by your peeps. These are the people that get you. And the moment that I can hear somebody on your show that represents me as a fellow listener, now I feel like I'm part of something bigger than just you and I. Right.
Yeah, that's really true. I also think with that, and I've been thinking about this a bunch lately, David, about both in like commercial marketing as well as in podcasting, the importance of narrowcasting.
Yes, let's talk about this. Yes,
because I think that there's people, you will find your energy to start something that is passionate, about what you're passionate is great. And I love seeing that people are doing that. But when people's focus is, I'm doing a podcast about entertainment, or I'm doing a podcast about business, you can cover almost anything in there, but as a result, you're covering almost nothing in there, right? Because the audience for that could be like 1 billion people, 3 billion people. Sure, if you can connect with that, 1 billion people, you're doing something well, but it's a pretty cluttered market, and it's one of the things I've observed of late, that if we do something, Polaris really focuses on the intersection of business and technology. AI is one of these topics. We do something on AI predictions, like best performing episode we've ever had. And I also think that, like, I don't have the formula for that right yet. My guidance is not like, if you want to get a more engaged audience, just talk about AI. There's a graphic that went around about a year and a half, 2 years ago, of the logos of all the companies that were involved in the AI industry on a single slide. This is from 2 years ago, and they were all about 3 points high.
Tiny. Yeah.
There must have been 25,000 on them.
Yeah.
And I think it's hard to get traction with something that's that big and messy. I think if one were to focus, say, on we want to focus on the use of AI in high school chemistry education, right? Whatever it is, you're going to pick something that's narrower, but it's easier for the people who care about that to find you because you're going to stand out. This isn't people talking about how to write law briefs or create new images. It's something that matters to me. And so you're going to connect with that audience. That audience is going to connect with you. And so I think that it's okay to narrowcast because you'll just get more traction there.
Yeah. Yeah, if you think of it from a user's perspective, when they go search for something, they're not searching in broad terms. They're searching in pretty specific terms. I'm not going to go to Google and say, "How do I sport?" Well, that's kind of vague. How do I do bowling, or how do I do lawn darts, or how do I do whatever curling up in Canada? Right? I'm going to search more narrow than just sports. I'm not going to search for that.
I mean, there's this little television show phenomenon that's been going on the last couple months called Severance, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are Severance podcasts, which is great because if you want to listen to people who want to go down all the rabbit holes of all the conspiracies, it's a wonderful place to explore those. You're not going to find that by just doing a generic search for entertainment podcasts and just keep listening and skipping until you hear something that's the subject of interest to you. You're going to build that. You're going to subscribe. You're going to get the notice when something's out. You may write to those, say, "Hey, I heard you say this last week, but I think you overlooked this." Right?
Right. Any tips for podcasters on using search to help you with your show? You hear a lot of people say that audio players like Apple and Spotify, Audible, not the most search friendly. I've had a different experience personally, but I've found it actually works for my show. It's titled in a way that it's a searchable term, the How to Podcast series. It's kind of I'm asking a question with the title of my show. So that's worked well for me. But from your perspective, is there anything related to podcasting where we can do better to be found through all these search options?
Well, I think you need to be really diligent about making sure that what you accompany your podcast with, and it can't just be that you've got a good narrative set of show notes that shows up further down the screen, but making sure that you are taking that copy, those concepts, even the transcript, and putting it somewhere else on the web so it can be searched and found. With those steps, you're much more likely to have people who may not even know they're looking for a podcast, but they know they're looking for, something about economic forecast for 2027 or whatever you had. Once you start getting in there, they're like, "Oh, there's a podcast about this." People will find you there, and they may jump over to Spotify and Apple to listen. Right? They're not just going to click through on your website to listen to it. I imagine some people will. That's the thing. I think people don't pay enough attention to the surrounding collateral for each episode, which is a struggle because if you're a podcaster who's trying to do 5 or 6 episodes a week, kudos to you. You don't have the time to, also craft, an article about your podcast every day.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of it goes back to the time investment you put into it. In real estate, we have equity that builds over time. So those all pay back for you. And then just the fact that people interact with you in a meaningful way. They come to your show and they stay. They don't come and leave. So every platform likes that, right? Apple's going to love you coming to Apple, staying on Apple. YouTube wants you to come to YouTube and stay on YouTube. So if you can have more people come to your content and stay, that logically makes sense that they're going to reward people who bring people to the platform and then the people stay there over people who bring people to the platform and 10 seconds later they're done. They're like, this is not for me. They're not more likely to advertise and promote those people because they're not having a good result. Google wants a good result, right?
Yeah, I mean, and there's things, I'm sure that you're a big expert on the importance of how you title the episode, what graphics you put in there, all those sorts of things. What's worked for you with getting, showing up kind of in those distributor searches as opposed to those nearline web searches.
Yeah. The titling obviously helps. The fact that I have over 500 episodes helps. There's a library there, right? It's not when you're first starting out, you have 5 episodes and a kind of obscure name, you have a lot of work to do. But when people tell me that if you name your podcast wrong, you're not going to be found, there was a thing called Coca-Cola years ago that nobody knew what a Coca-Cola was, but look at them now. They're doing pretty good. They had to train their audience to what that product was and the branding and everything. It took a long time, but now it's everywhere. You can go any country in the world, you're going to see that logo. Right. So there's things you can do no matter how obscure or unique your podcast name is or how generic or basic it is. There's just how much time and effort you want to pour into your endeavor to help it grow. That's kind of your choice.
Naming is hard. There's a president at Microsoft Marketing who laments the fact that no matter what you think, every word in the English language has already been used 12 times for something. Like,
right. Yeah.
And which doesn't mean that you shouldn't display some creativity. Like you mentioned, Coca-Cola, that was a pattern of letters that never existed until then. And if you stick with something and persist, you get to fill it with your own meaning.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're not competing against anybody because you made up words that didn't exist. So
Right.
It's just going to take more time. That's all.
Right. But, as opposed to the music podcast, you're never going to get found.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. It's hard. So I love narrowcasting. I'll give an example before we leave. I had a gentleman reach out and he wanted to do a podcast for chicken farmers because he has technology that I guess does something to do with sorting the eggs. And they come down the conveyor belt and he's got cameras and stuff. So he wanted a podcast to talk about chickens and chicken eggs and not farming, not chickens, not eggs, but the tools to sort the eggs. So he created a podcast just about that. Talk about narrowcasting, right down. Would you say your term narrowcasting, is that the exact same terminology as a niche? We say in Canada, or a niche for you guys in the States. Is that exactly the same word, or do you think narrowcasting is different than niche and niche?
I think it's close, but I would say, when I say narrowcasting, I think you want to hit a zone around the niche.
Okay.
From your example, there might be someone who is looking at duck egg sorting equipment, right?
Yep.
So and they may be, I'm not an expert in these. Are you?
No, I have no.
Maybe the same equipment works. I don't know, but that's an example of, there might also be someone who is looking at automatic chicken feeding systems.
Right.
And just thinking about what are some of the things because there's weather dynamics that are the same. So I think you want to hit stuff that might be within one standard deviation of your narrowcast, of your niche topic.
Yeah.
And so it's narrowcasting. It's not laser casting.
Okay. You just keep making up words. I love this. This is great.
Well, it's fun. It's a technique I've seen used sometimes in commercial marketing, is to craft a podcast that you don't release commercially, but that you distribute to one person or to a small group of people, because what you're trying to do is stand out and not just say, here's a PowerPoint file about all the wonderful things that we do, but to say, hey, we wanted to do something different for you. And so here's an episode that is just for you, that you'll never be able to get anywhere else, and no one else will ever be able to get this. I don't know. It's for all the reasons why a podcast could be a very personal way to engage a broader audience. It's also a format that can work really well for a handful of people where, I am writing this podcast for 3 people to listen to.
I'm not going to be a top 100 podcast if I only focus on 3 people, Chris. Come on.
I know. But that's
right.
It's a special gift.
Yeah. See, I like that idea. Again, not just content, but also audience for narrowcasting. That's good.
Right.
I love it. Well, I know you have like 100 more things to add to your website because you've done so much already today. So I know we got to let you go. But I'd love to have you come back in the future, Chris, and keep talking because we didn't really get into it. I love talking about SEO. I love talking about AI tools. Your background and your expertise would be great for my audience to really tap into. So if you're okay with it and down the road in the future, if we can pull back together and continue the conversation, I'd love to have you back.
Yeah, I'd love. I'll give your audience a tease. There's a lot of AI that I use when I have to scale for how do I keep track of what the next question I want to ask someone is, as well as how do I assemble all these materials. There's a ton that AI can do to help, and yeah, I would love to come back. This has been an absolute delight and a pleasure, David. So thanks for having me on. And if folks need to get in touch with me, you can find me at chrismcnulty.net. And whether you're looking for the business strategy professional side of my life or want to hear how terrible some of my songs are, that'll get you to wherever you need to be.
And I would encourage everyone to go take a look. There's 2 pictures you got to find on the website of these amazing gas station things. And oh my gosh, I traveled back in time just looking at these. They're gorgeous. So there's your homework, everyone. You got to go find those 2 photos. And then you can even buy a copy. So come on, do that as well. I'm sure Chris wouldn't be upset if you did that.
No. But no. Thanks for mentioning that, and it's been great to be here, and look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. Everyone, all the information, as always, for Chris in the show notes. Go check out his podcast. If you love Microsoft and you love pivot tables and Excel and SharePoint, you know where to go now. And make sure you let somebody know as well. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast all the way through to the end. I love having these great guest co-hosts on the show to share their podcasts with you. You have some homework to do. And what I'm asking of you is to go check out our featured guest co-host today. Go over and listen to their podcast. The links are always in the show notes. And I'd love for you to go and give them your love and support. And I think if we can all do that for each other, podcasting will be a lot more fun for all of us. So it's time to do what you've asked others to do for you. It's time to do for this guest co-host. Links in the show notes. Go over and check out their show and leave them a review, do the follow, go listen to their episodes in full, the entirety of an episode, which again shows to the apps that it's a good podcast because you're going there and you're staying to the end. Probably one of the best ways you can help a podcaster grow their audience and be shown to more people is by simply going and listening wherever you listen to the very end, like you're doing right now here. This is the perfect way to signal to wherever you're listening on, this is a podcast worth promoting. And all of the apps want you to stay on as long as possible. So go over and listen to our guest co-host episode and leave them some feedback. If they have a buy me a coffee, send them a coffee. If they have a speak pipe, send them a voice message. If they have an email, send them an email. If they're on Instagram, send them a direct message. Do something to support our guest co-hosts. They've given up their time to be here with you, to be here with me, and we can give that back to them with time and attention, our love, our support. Thank you for doing all that for me as well. Here on the How to Podcast series, we'll talk to you soon for our next episode.